Trace your finger along the map from Nassau toward the coast of North Carolina and picture the year 1718 as the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rigging, stale bilge water, salted meat, wood smoke, and lingering sulfur drifted across the deck of the pirate flagship beneath low gray clouds. Edward Teach, remembered as Blackbeard, commanded the formidable Queen Anne's Revenge, a vessel of roughly 300 tons carrying nearly 40 cannon after being converted from a captured French slave ship into one of the most intimidating warships of the Golden Age of Piracy. Massive white oak futtocks reinforced her hull, hand-forged iron spikes nearly 12 inches long secured every timber, and repeated careening covered the planking with fresh pine tar while oakum was hammered deep into every seam to keep the Atlantic beyond the hull. According to this fictional story inspired by the era, several women taken from captured merchant vessels found themselves living aboard the pirate ship for weeks while Blackbeard searched for new prizes along the American coast. Contrary to popular legend, they were not surrounded by overflowing tables of exotic food or endless barrels of fresh supplies. Life at sea reduced everyone, pirate and prisoner alike, to whatever could survive months inside damp wooden casks. Each sunrise began with hard ship's biscuit, baked months earlier, often cracked apart to remove weevils before eating. Salted beef preserved beneath thick layers of coarse salt had to be soaked before cooking, while dried peas, oatmeal, and small portions of cheese appeared only when stores remained unspoiled. Fresh fruit disappeared within days of leaving port, leaving onions and dried beans as precious defenses against disease. Every meal reminded those aboard that the greatest enemy on the Atlantic was often hunger rather than another pirate ship, and the women quickly learned that survival depended upon accepting food few people on land would willingly touch. The daily ration depended entirely upon the condition of the ship's stores rather than rank or comfort. Water-filled oak barrels built by skilled co-opers gradually absorbed the taste of wood, pine tar, and stagnant bilge air after weeks beneath the lower deck. If a cask leaked through even a hairline gap between the staves, seawater could spoil its contents long before the voyage ended. According to this fictional story inspired by the era, the women quickly discovered that breakfast often consisted of nothing more than a fist-sized piece of ship's biscuit so hard it had to be softened in watered beer or thin broth before it could be chewed. The biscuit itself was rarely clean. Tiny beetles, flour weevils, and wormholes were common because the flour had been stored for months before baking, and sailors simply knocked the insects free with the handle of a knife before eating the remainder. Salt pork hanging from overhead beams frequently developed a rancid smell as tropical heat melted the fat, while salted beef became so tough that it simmered for hours inside large iron cauldrons suspended over brick hearths built into the ship's galley. Whenever fortune favored the crew, fishermen lowered hand lines over the stern and caught mackerel, snapper, or tuna that briefly transformed the evening meal into something almost fresh. Those moments were rare. Most days the women survived on preserved food, careful rationing, and whatever the sea was willing to provide before the next storm or battle interrupted even the simplest chance to eat. Fresh food disappeared with astonishing speed aboard any long voyage. According to this fictional story inspired by life during the Golden Age of Piracy, the women learned that the ship's cook wasted almost nothing. Barrels of dried peas were boiled into thick stews with scraps of salt beef, onions, and whatever herbs could be obtained during the last visit to port. When flour remained dry, coarse flatbread was baked upon iron plates heated over the galley fire. But high humidity usually spoiled sacks long before the voyage ended. The women discovered that mold was often cut away from cheese rather than throwing the entire wheel overboard, while smoked fish hanging beneath the deck beams could become so dry it required soaking before it could be eaten. During successful raids on merchant ships, the diet improved briefly. Captured cargo sometimes included fresh citrus, coconuts, rice, sugar, cassava bread, dried fruit, or live chickens that supplied precious eggs and meat for only a few days before the supplies vanished. Afterward, everyone returned to the same predictable rations. Even Blackbeard's feared crew depended upon careful preservation because a pirate ship could spend weeks without sight of land. The women realized that survival did not depend upon luxury, but upon accepting every edible morsel before rot, moisture, rats, or insects destroyed the remaining provisions hidden deep within the dark wooden hold. As the voyage stretched from days into weeks, the greatest threat to the food stores was not hunger alone, but the relentless Atlantic itself. According to this fictional story inspired by the era, the women watched sailors inspect every barrel each morning because a single cracked stave could ruin hundreds of pounds of provisions. Rats gnawed through sacks of grain, moisture crept into flour, and mold spread rapidly through poorly ventilated corners of the hold. Whenever a barrel of fresh water turned foul, its contents were discarded or mixed with small quantities of beer to make it barely drinkable. The women learned to recognize the sharp smell of spoiled pork long before the cook opened the cask. Yet even then, only the worst portions were thrown away while the rest was boiled for hours in an attempt to make it edible. Hunger left little room for pride. Bones were simmered repeatedly to extract every trace of nourishment. Dried peas were crushed into thick porridge, and stale biscuit crumbs were mixed into stews so nothing useful disappeared overboard. During rough weather, no cooking was possible at all because the iron cauldron swung violently above the galley hearth, threatening to spill boiling broth across the deck. On those days, everyone, pirates and prisoners alike, survived on cold biscuit, dried meat, and whatever small ration could be eaten with one hand while the other clung desperately to the rolling ship. According to this fictional story inspired by the Golden Age of Piracy, the women eventually understood that the greatest surprise aboard Blackbeard's ship was not what they ate, but how little separated prisoners from pirates when supplies grew scarce. The captain might command the vessel and decide the course, yet he could not command the wind, the weather, or the condition of the provisions stored below deck. If storms delayed the voyage, every ration was reduced. Fresh bread disappeared first, followed by cheese, onions, and dried fruit. Salt beef, pork, peas, oatmeal, and hard biscuit became the only dependable meals for everyone aboard. When luck favored the crew, they caught sea turtles, flying fish, or large schools of mackerel, roasting the fresh meat over the galley fire before preserving whatever remained with coarse salt. Those rare feasts never lasted. Within days, the familiar routine returned as empty barrels replaced full ones, and the ship's hold echoed with the scraping of the last biscuit from wooden casks. The women survived not through abundance, but through endurance, discovering that life aboard one of history's most feared pirate ships was defined less by treasure and celebration than by strict rationing, relentless hunger, spoiled food, and the constant uncertainty of whether the next sunrise would bring another meal or another desperate day at sea. Although this is a fictional story inspired by the real conditions aboard pirate ships during the Golden Age of Piracy, the food described reflects what historians know about life at sea in the early 18th century. Crews aboard vessels such as Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge depended primarily on hardtack, salted beef and pork, dried peas, oatmeal, cheese, dried beans, and whatever fresh fish, turtles, or provisions they managed to obtain before they spoiled. Fresh fruit and vegetables vanished quickly. Clean drinking water often became stagnant after weeks in wooden barrels, and every remaining ration had to be carefully protected from moisture, mold, insects, and rats. The women in this story survived not because pirate life was filled with luxury, but because they adapted to the same harsh conditions that every sailor faced. Behind the legends of overflowing treasure chests and endless celebrations stood a far harsher reality, where survival depended on discipline, endurance, careful rationing, and the ability to endure hunger for weeks while crossing one of the most unforgiving oceans in the world.